19th century political earthquakes. If you look at the map of Europe after 1815, what you see is the geographical results of the settlement reached by what is known as the Congress of Vienna, which you see here, which was held over 15 months from 1814 and 1815 after the defeat of Napoleon Bonaparte. These geographical results were striking, to say the least. As was common in European peace settlements over the century, the Congress redrew the map of Europe to suit certain territorial claims of rulers and to create a balance in which the powerful of Europe received what they thought they had earned in the fighting, but also none of them received more than the others, so that they would each have equal fighting strength and be able to deter each other from attacks. However, a new element had also worked its way into the settlements. The new map of Europe was designed primarily by the representatives of the big four powers who had fought Napoleon: Great Britain, Austria, Prussia, and Russia. France, which was a major power still and was the focus of the negotiations, was also represented. The primary goal of the new organization of Europe, as expressed in the new map, was to isolate France, to make certain that the greatest power in Europe at the time was contained and unable to break out in conquest once again in Europe. Napoleon's near success at reviving his empire during the so-called 100 Days after his escape from his first exile on the island of Elba in 1814 in the Mediterranean Sea, during the Congress session only served to emphasize the need for this measure. The redistribution of territory to reward the victors, which was certainly an important goal in everyone's minds, took a back seat to this goal of isolation. To carry out the isolation, the Big Four insisted on the creation of a cordon of nation-states that could act as a kind of combination of defensive barrier and tripwire. And if you look, this is the French Empire in 1810, and you can see that all of these different areas in Europe are controlled to some degree or other by the French. After Napoleon's defeat and the Congress of Vienna in 1817, you can see that we have a group of tripwire states. We have the Netherlands here. We have part of Prussia here. Let me make this a bit wider. We have another state, a German state here, right, and the recreation of Switzerland here, and then this is Sardinia here. Right, so all of these states form a kind of barrier that is designed to prevent the French from attacking into Europe by running up against these states. And if they run up against these states and are attacking, then these states' job was to hold them until the Big Four, which were, of course, England, Prussia, Russia, and Austria, could get their armies together and come and attack, come and defend this border. So the Congress of Vienna was primarily about that. And in order to make all of that work, they had to redistribute territory so that each state had both, each of these big four had both roughly equal power and equal tax income, but that there was also this cordon of states here to keep France in check. However, as conservative as those of the Congress of Vienna were, particularly Metternich, there was a realization that prevention of another Napoleon required that the French people could accept the return of the monarchy. So Louis XVIII was required to accept the Constitution of France. The Congress of Vienna put Louis XVIII, who was a cousin of Louis XVI, who had been killed during the French Revolution, back on the French throne, but they required him to accept that there's a constitution and he has a limited role as head of state. And they also required that he accept a French legislature. They did not do that with the new states they created to deter French attack on Europe. The new states were, without exception, not democracies or republics. Instead, the intention of the framers of the Vienna Agreements was to ignore the republican influences of the French Revolution, as well as its nationalist legacy, and instead shore up the traditional form of government in Europe at the time, monarchy. The style of government was considered by the framers to be superior to democracy for a number of reasons. They saw it as more rational, more decisive, less divisive, and more economical. They also saw it as being traditional and true. These framers of the Vienna agreements distrusted republicanism. They distrusted the idea that large segments of the commoner population might, by voting, help decide state policies. This, to them, seemed like a recipe for chaos, indecisiveness, and weakness. And so, for these reasons, the states they restored along the borders of France in 1815 were to be monarchies. The states created included in the north the Kingdom of the Netherlands, in the east Prussia, a re-established Switzerland, and the Kingdom of Sardinia. In the southwest, Spain was returned to the rule of the Bourbons. The creation of these border states then also meant adjustments of borders to the Big Four, and they switched around territories to make sure that they each had roughly the same tax takes, same size militaries, and borders that were suitable to their needs to deter each other from attacking and trying to conquer Europe. So in a sense, the Vienna Accords was finally on paper agreement that no one would be able to create an empire in Europe. After the peace agreements were concluded, the Big Four decided to continue to meet regularly to deal with issues facing Europe, attempting to referee conflicts and guarantee security in what might be called a forerunner of the collective security system that eventually resulted in the United Nations more than a century later. This system, which came to be known as the Concert of Europe, worked for nearly 30 years to guarantee the peace and minimize conflict in Europe. In fact, even as the concert became slowly defunct, the agreements made were successful in preventing any major conflict among European powers until 1914, 99 years after the Vienna Agreements were reached. In 1854, the Concert of Europe did begin to show some weakness. Great Britain, which was busy with its empire and industrial revolution, had ceased meeting regularly with the other concert powers, though it did meet with them when British interests were threatened and acted in accord with them often. Still, the British were back into their idea of what they called splendid isolation. By 1854, however, conflicts arose over the Russian desire to control the area known as the Crimea. And that area is right here. It's the same area that's currently under in controversy in the world. Russian desire to control the Crimea, which would give Russia access to the Black Sea and through it to the Dardanelles Strait and the Mediterranean, and that would mean a warm water port so that the Russian Navy was not blocked from the open sea by ice for months each year. So here's the Russian strategic desire. Their primary ports are way up in the north, near Lithuania and Latvia in the North Sea. And their hope was, because those primary ports were blocked by ice every year, and particularly in this period, we're still talking about ships mostly made of wood, their hope was to be able to use the Crimea as a naval base, which it is today. And by using the bay here and the city of Sebastopol as a naval base, the Russians would be able then to run their ships across the Black Sea, through the Dardanelles Straits, which are right here at Constantinople, and then again right through here into the Aegean Sea, and that would give them a warm water port to move their navies in and out. Now, there are several strategic problems with this. The French wanted influence in Turkey and felt threatened by Russian relations with the Turks, and of course the Russians need good relations with the Turks to be able to keep the straits open here. Great Britain was concerned that Russian access to the ocean year-round would threaten English mastery of the seas, which the British believed they required for their empire. So this was a kind of ready-made conflict for the Big Four powers, with the exception of Prussia, which really didn't take any part. This complex clash of national interests was complicated, or perhaps taken advantage of, when France wanted access to Ottoman coffee and other trade, made a serious diplomatic effort, and won the right to protect Christendom within the Ottoman Empire from the Sultan. This was a nominal right that had been traditionally granted to the Russians. With an opportunity to take the Crimea in mind, the Russians made a fuss in claiming that this was an insult that the Ottomans had given this right to the French. And this was their reason for invading the Crimea, which at the time belonged to the Turks and the Cossacks. The French and the English were not able to accept allowing the Russians to take the Crimea for strategic reasons. And so they went to war with Russia over the territory in 1854. The other concert powers, Austria and Prussia, having no direct interest in the Crimea themselves but bound to Russia by a holy alliance, refused to participate either as allies or as peacemakers. Here we can see a real failure of the alliance system crafted in Vienna, particularly because it occurred between the Big Four. But the idea of the concert of Europe and the primary results and goals of the Vienna Accords did not fail or collapse because of the Crimean War. The Big Four were able to work together in limited ways following the war as well, and the peace held until 1914. But you can see, in fact, it's at the Crimean War where Florence Nightingale begins nursing, that is, women in nursing, and also created innovations in European, particularly military hospital care by keeping the hospitals clean and free of germs and dirt, by bandaging the soldiers who were wounded, and by separating the soldiers who were sick from those who were wounded. So major steps forward because of the Crimean War in hospital care. International affairs in European states were not so smooth, however. Internal affairs, in European states were not so smooth, however. During the last half of the 19th century, in accord with the Vienna Agreements of 1815, Italy was divided into a number of different states, including the Kingdom of Sardinia, which included the island of Sardinia and a section of the northern part of the Italian peninsula bordering France, known as Piedmont. So this is the Kingdom of Sardinia, including Piedmont up here, and the island of Sardinia right here. The Kingdom of Naples, which is, let's see, Naples, these are the Papal States right here. We have the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies in this map, or the Kingdom of Naples right here. The Kingdom of Venice, Venetia, Lombardy, Parma, Modena, Tuscany. These are each one of them individual states. In the 1830s, various political pressures, including particularly the increase in popularity of nationalism, classical liberalism, provided the impetus for Italy to begin the process of unification, which it would complete in 1861. One of the most important voices in this change was Giuseppe Mazzini. Mazzini defined nationalism as a unified group of people who share a common language, common history, and common culture. He was specifically against the Vienna Agreements because they supported monarchy and caused different nationalities to be forced together in the same state. Mazzini believed that only a state unified by nationalism could be successful in the world, and in fact claimed that national unity was God's plan for the organization of a state. That it was not only natural, but that God had devised different nationalities for different purposes in history. And so Mazzini believed that each nation had a place in a kind of international order from top to bottom, a hierarchy of national destinies. Giuseppe Garibaldi, an activist nationalist in the Kingdom of Piedmont, agreed with Mazzini and built a paramilitary organization of men he called the Red Shirts, because they wore red shirts as their uniform. They pledged to support Garibaldi's nationalist aspirations. Garibaldi wanted to unify Italy and make the unified state a democracy. In 1860, after participating in an earlier attempt at revolution, he went to Uruguay and then came back and became commander of an Italian legion in Uruguay. He raised his red shirts in 1860 and with 1,000 of them joined an insurrection in Sicily in 1860. This is a painting of Garibaldi and his men heading out to take control of Sicily in the name of a unified Italy. In Piedmont, which is the Kingdom of Sardinia, right? This is Kingdom of Sardinia, with Piedmont here, the continental piece, and Sardinia, the south. In Piedmont, advisors of the King of Sardinia recognized the beginnings of a liberal nationalist uprising that might succeed and convinced the king to attempt a forcible unification of the Italian peninsula before the red shirts were successful. So essentially they raced down the peninsula to try and beat Garibaldi, and Garibaldi had attacked Sicily here, right? So they raced down, attacked Sicily, and then eventually Garibaldi was able to go up into Naples, and the troops of the Kingdom of Sardinia raced down the Italian peninsula and met him at Naples. And Garibaldi agreed that a unified Italy under the king was good enough for him, and so he laid down his weapons and accepted unified Italy. Now this is really important. The resulting Italian state was surprisingly powerful. With borders erased and a much larger population, a newly unified economy surged ahead, and there were far more potential recruits for an army that became much larger than any Italian state had held since perhaps the Roman times. Italy became a power in Europe, and so in this instance then, nationalism had done just what Vienna negotiators such as Metternich had feared, created a new, powerful, liberal, nationalist, and less predictable state on the borders of the Austrian Empire. So here's where the Vienna Accords begin to crumble, and the conservative triumph of 1815 to give way to nationalism and classical liberalism. But the final change wouldn't come until 1914 to 1918, and that would be a major upheaval known as World War